Phil Brady is giving speech number 1 from the Interpretive Reading Manual, a speech project titled Read a Story. The objectives are to understand the elements of interpretive reading, to learn how to analyze a narrative and plan for effective interpretation, and to apply vocal techniques that will aid in the effectiveness of the reading. The time is 5 to 7 minutes. Phil will be reading from a book by Jay Winnick titled April 1865, the Month That Saved America. The title of the speech is April 1865. Please help me welcome Phil Brady.
Thank you, Madam Toastmaster. Allow me to set the scene for this story I'm about to read. It's April 1865. Richmond had been evacuated. A good deal of it had been destroyed and burnt down simply by the Confederates themselves setting fire to munitions, which caused a conflagration and wiped out a good bit of the city. General Lee had surrendered to General Grant, and now the people had come back into Richmond and were trying to make their way and settle themselves about and build some kind of a future. I am a pauper, noted one now destitute Southerner, a friend of Mary Chestnut's. But she added stoically, putting her best face on things, I am smiling as comfortable as ever. Another, Sam Watkins, a Confederate private who had quietly returned to the family farm in Columbia, Tennessee, when the war was over, to work the fields by day and write his memoirs by night, concluded, the sun rises over the fields and sets over the mountains. The compass just points up and down, and we can laugh now at the absurd notion of there being the North and the South. We are one and undivided. Not completely, for the hate was still too strong, but it was a start. And the people looked for signs of healing. One of the more poignant moments occurred in Richmond late that spring. It was a warm Sunday at St. Paul's Episcopal Church, and an older man, one of the church's many distinguished communicants, who had spent the last 4 years in war, was sitting in his customary pew. With his shoulders rounded, his middle thickened, his hair snow white, and beard gray, as usual, he attracted the attention of the rest of the church. But then so did another parishioner. As the minister, Dr. Charles Mitterrand, was about to administer Holy Communion, a tall, well-dressed black man sitting in the western gallery, which was reserved for Negroes, unexpectedly advanced to the communion table. Unexpectedly, because this had never happened here before. Suddenly, the image of Richmond Redux was conjured up, a flashback to pre-war years. Usually, whites received communion first, then blacks, a small but strictly adhered to ritual, repeated so often that to alter was unthinkable. This one small act, then, was like a large frontier separating two worlds, the first being the antebellum South, the second being the post-Civil War America. The congregation froze. Those who had been ready to go forward and kneel at the altar rail remained fixed in their pews. Momentarily stunned, Mitterrand himself was clearly embarrassed. The horror and surprise of the congregation were no doubt largely visceral, but Mitterrand's silent retreat was evident. It was one thing for the white South to endure defeat and poverty, or to accept the fact that slaves were now free. It was quite another for a black man to stride up to the front of the church as though an equal. And not just any church, but here at the sanctuary for Richmond's elite, the wealthy, the well-bred, the high culture. The black man slowly lowered his body, kneeling. while the rest of the congregation tensed in their pews. For his part, the minister stood clearly uncomfortable and still dumbfounded. After what seemed to be an interminable amount of time, although it was probably only seconds, the white man arose, his gait erect, head up and eyes proud, and he walked quietly up the aisle to the chancel rail. His face was a portrait of exhaustion, and he looked far older than most people had remembered when the war had just begun. These days had been hard on him. Recently, in a rare, unguarded moment, he had uncharacteristically blurted out, "I'm homeless. I have nothing on earth." Yet these Richmonders, like all of the South, still looked to him for a sense of purpose and guidance. No less so now, as with quiet dignity and self-possession, he knelt down to partake of the communion along the same rail with the black man. Watching Robert E. Lee, the other communicants slowly followed in his path, going forward to the altar, and with a mixture of reluctance and fear, hope and awkward expectation into the future. Madam Toastmaster.
Thank you, Phil. If you all would please take a moment to write some notes for